Good morning, everybody, and welcome to IGTV. With us this morning is Bill Murray for the InfraGard Editorial. We're talking about viruses, in specific context, iOS and Apple. Take it away, Bill.
Good morning. About 20 years ago, I used to do a presentation based upon an early paper in which I identified 4 conditions necessary and sufficient for the successful spread of a computer virus. First, there had to be a population of similar systems capable of executing and replicating the virus. Second, there had to be some vector for sharing the virus among the various computers in the population. There had to be a way for the virus to replicate, that is, to get itself executed. And finally, storage in which it could store the copy of itself. By restricting any of these things, we could resist the spread of the virus. Of course, these things are otherwise desirable. There is resistance to restricting them. In the early 90s, I attended a meeting at IBM Research. Fred Cohen, the godfather, not to say the midwife, of all viruses, gave a presentation in which he observed that in a world of application-only computers, we might still enjoy most, but not all, of the advantages of the modern computer. I thought about this for a while. This was a way of looking at the third condition, the ability of the virus to get itself executed. The Windows operating system had a dozen ways for a program to be executed automatically. Even if we restricted all of these, the virus might still get itself executed by duping the user into clicking on it. We have had application-only computers for a long time. My favorite example is the ATM, the automated teller machine. I also like the arcade machines like Pac-Man. I think they're very instructive. One thing that distinguishes the application-only machine from a general-purpose computer is programmability. The virus exploits the ability of the user to execute an arbitrary program of his own choice, or even his own writing. After listening to Fred, I concluded that even if we could stamp out programming, it is so valuable that some SOB would just reinvent it. Then along came Apple with the iPhone and what we now know as iOS. At first, Apple said, "No user programs." Of course, they did not say that explicitly. They just did not provide any capability for creating one, importing it, or executing it. Apple did not offer an application program interface, API, or a software development kit, SDK. Voila, an application-only, virus-resistant computer. Only a few geeks understood this. Apple was offering a closed system, while the geeks clearly preferred, not to say demanded, an open system. Most of the rest of us did not realize that we were buying a crippled computer. We thought that we were buying a smartphone. Gradually, Apple has rehabilitated iOS. They have provided an API and an SDK, both carefully crafted to maintain security. Applications run in an isolated compartment that Apple calls a sandbox. Each application looks like an application machine to the user and hides the operating system, the file system, and even the network from the user. However, all 4 of the necessary conditions for the success of a virus are still restricted in some way or another. iPhones and iPads can be viewed as application-only computers. Just as Fred promised, the tens of millions of users of iOS enjoy most, but not all of the advantages of the general-purpose computer. On the other hand, just as Fred predicted, they are pretty much virus-free. On the other hand, I was right too. The geeks are still trying to liberate, to jailbreak iOS, to restore to it all of the generality, flexibility, and capability that Apple has arbitrarily denied to them, along, of course, with the inherent vulnerability from which Apple has protected them. On July 15th, Apple released an update to iOS, version 4.3.4, to close a vulnerability exploited by the jailbreakers, one that could have been exploited by others. German authorities assert that this vulnerability had, in some form or another, existed for 4 years. Less than 12 hours after Apple released 4.3.4, a new jailbreak was available. Last night, Apple released version 4.3.5 with a fix for that vulnerability and 3 vulnerabilities in other parsers. So far, Apple has patched the parser half a dozen times. Each time, the geeks have found another vulnerability. We call this strategy of late vulnerability detection and patching the Microsoft strategy. It is likely to be about as successful for Apple as it has been for Microsoft. All that's necessary to use this vulnerability to jailbreak is to click on a crafted PDF on a web page. How can it be that easy? It exploits an implementation-induced vulnerability, an unchecked input in the PDF parser within the Safari browser. While the jailbreak PDF is overt, chosen by the user, and only Apple considers it malicious, the same vulnerability could be used to make more covert and malicious changes to an iOS device. As we noted here before, checking inputs is difficult. It is particularly difficult for a browser where most inputs are legal and illegal ones difficult to enumerate. Therefore, including a browser, Safari, in the operating system is inherently dangerous. Trying to parse PDFs in the operating system is insane. We've talked here about how difficult it is to check inputs in modern systems. That's why we recommend the use of the OWASP Enterprise Security API library for web servers. No such library exists for browsers, much less for PDF parsers. Parsing PDF input appears to be so difficult that even Adobe must issue frequent, not to say weekly, patches. Eventually, Apple is going to have to resort to a more fundamental strategy, like, for example, removing Safari from the OS. In the meantime, for users, there are 6 alternative browsers for iOS. Unlike Safari, they all run as applications. Using one of these, running in its sandbox, a user could parse the same rogue PDF safely. Users who like the relatively sanitary environment of their iDevices should care about a fundamental fix. Enterprises should care. Android is too open to ever be trusted. RIM is struggling just to stay in business. Last night, they laid off 10% of their workforce. The geeks are still whining and will complain about a fundamental fix. Steve will tell them that if they want an open system to buy a Mac, hell, even buy an Android. iOS is about as open as it is likely to get. I'm glad that there are more open alternatives to iOS, but not nearly so glad as I am that iOS is closed. So far, this vulnerability has only been used by geeks to jailbreak. It has not been exploited by rogue hackers. It is a vulnerability without a threat, not a risk, not a problem. So far. Until Apple does something more effective than patch, professionals that rely upon iOS to protect the applications and data of their principals must be on the alert for any emergent threat. While we're not happy about it, that is why we are called professionals and are paid the big bucks. See you next week.
Thanks, Bill. You were absolutely right about that. I did detect a sense of humor in that, and I couldn't hold back some laughter. We'll see you next week. Take it easy.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.